Hello, and welcome to another episode of Climbing on the Bookshelf. It's been a little while since I last put out an episode, which was back in August of last year. A couple of things happened, not allowing time to book in more chats, and a new job started in November. You all know how life gets in the way sometimes. But this year, I have a few people lined up and just need to fix a date to chat, so keep following the podcast and please be patient. I just want to say a huge thank you for your continued support and following, so please do rate and review my show as this helps new people find it. Thank you. This episode is a really special one as it concentrates on the golden age of Yosemite climbing. Yes, those years. I can't take any credit for the interview at all, but have chosen the parts I think you would all love to hear. This episode is part 1, as I think there may be another 2 parts to the interview that I can release throughout this year, so listen out for those. I just want to say a huge thank you to the very kind people at the American Alpine Club Library for giving me access to this interview from their archive. So now, I'll just let you listen to this amazing interview that was recorded back in November 2015 with none other than Steve Roper. He is the main voice of the interview, but there are 2 others in the same room, one of which is Allen Steck, and the interviewer is Jim McCarthy. Hope you enjoy this trip down memory lane.
First of all, how old are you now?
Yeah, 74.
That young, huh?
Yeah.
Okay. What was your introduction to climbing?
Well, my old man was a chemist down here in Emeryville, and his boss was none other than Hervé Vosges, another famous Yosemite climber. And so Hervé Vosges in 1954, when I was 13, said, take the kid climbing sometime. And so I went to Indian Rock, and this is where I met Steck, Allen Steck. Indian Rock, about 1954, you were sort of the leader of some of those Sunday outings. And so I learned to climb very slowly. I was only 13, so they wouldn't trust me to do anything. So they made me tie knots behind my back because he could do it in the dark. And various things, and rappelling, and it took me about 3 years before they trusted me enough to let me go to the valley with them. Mm-hmm. So in 1956, I did go to the valley and did a real shit climb called the east face of Glacier Point. Nobody's ever done it again, I'm sure. Terrible route, wet by Illilouette Falls.
Oh, okay.
And then the next year, 57, I started branching out on my own with some local friends. And by 58, I was doing some significant climbs, and this every year got more sophisticated. Until about 1959, I was climbing things like the Lost Arrow, Steck's route on Yosemite Point Buttress, the 4th ascent of your route on El Cap East Buttress, 4th ascent, and Pearl Harbor Day, 1959. And then it went on from there.
Who were your early climbing partners, Steve?
Well, there was a fellow down and still lives here in Berkeley named Cray Ritter. He was a grad student at Cal. So he and I climbed a lot together in 57 and 58. And then we met Chuck Pratt, my God, at Indian Rock, probably in late 57. And so Cray Ritter and Pratt and I, in 58, went up to the valley for about 3 weeks. Climbed it like mad, first ascents and all sorts of very good climbs. And then I climbed, of course, with Leighton Core in 1960 a lot, Glenn Denny. Steck was a workaholic down there to ski hut, so I rarely climbed with...
Job.
He had a real job, imagine that. Yeah. And meanwhile, I was going in and out of colleges, quitting when the season came along, so I only got about 1.5 years of college. And climbed with the Royal a lot, Royal Robbins, and Frost a little bit. Harding, only one route with Warren Harding over on Glacier Point Apron with Fred Beckey, in fact. So Beckey, Harding, and I did some stupid route over on the Apron. So I've climbed with many people. I've climbed even with McCarthy, the famous Jim McCarthy in the Schwangungs. And that story is a very good one because Steck and I had climbed the Salathé Wall, so in theory I was in good shape 1966. But then I didn't climb for 4 months, traveling with my then wife back east, and met up with McCarthy and Core. And I said, for my first climb ever in the Gunks, I want to do a high exposure. He said, fine. And then the pastor takes me over to around a little corner and said, this is the start right here. And you traverse left about 30 feet, and then it just gets a little bit easier. And I said, shit, man, this is dead vertical, little tiny half-inch drips. And so I said, are you sure this is the route? It's like, shit, I've been here for 100 times, and this is the route. And it was called the Direttissima. It was 5'9", probably 10A by now or something.
You'd be surprised how the grade has ascended over the years.
Yeah, I'll bet. So I almost fell off. There was a couple of fixed pitons there, and so I clipped into those barely, and then made it. And at the end of it, I was cursing. I said, this is not 5'6", you bastard. So Core was not saying much. Core could have helped me, but he was playing along with the joke. 1966, yeah.
All right. Let's talk about pitons for a second. When you started climbing, you probably were climbing, I suppose, with soft iron.
Oh yeah.
Was that true?
All European.
And where did you guys get the stuff from?
Ski Hut, which Steck was the manager of, always carried soft pitons, Cassins, Stubais, I think.
Right.
Fritches, a thing called Fritches. All European. Except for about 1956, along came Holyabar, Colorado.
Yeah.
And Jerry, Colorado, but nobody around. Well, yeah, there's a guy, Clocar, who lived in San Francisco, had a shop right by the ferry building, and he sold his stuff for about 20 cents each. Beautiful looking stuff, but still soft.
Did you go to his?
No, I saw it a lot when I drove by it, because Clocar, yeah. Never met the man, but he made good pitons.
What was your first experience with hard pitons?
Well, 1959, Chenard drove up, and in the back of his car, he opened up his trunk. We'd barely met him, 1959, June, and it was either then or a few months later. Opened up his trunk of his car, and there, in a box, there's dozens of beautiful pitons. And he says, watch this, and he takes one out, and we go over to a boulder, and he just starts smashing it into an incipient crack. And by God, it went in. And he says, watch this. And he took it out, and it was untouched, absolutely untouched. Little did we know, of course, it would ruined the crack. Probably there's still scars on little boulders in Camp 4. But 59, yeah.
Did Dick Long produce some knife blades? I have a recollection of
Oh, yeah.
When was that, Steve?
I'd say 59. Chuck Wiltz had already made some earlier ones, but Long was 1959, I think, and they were good. They're about as good as Wiltz. He treated nicely.
Were you ever able to get a hold of any of Salate's pins?
I didn't get them directly, but I've been given at least 3 now. Bob Swift gave me one, and a guy Salate climbed with in 1951, a guy named Cliff Hobson. When I was writing my book, Camp 4, I got in touch with Cliff Hobson somehow. And I said, by the way, do you have any Salate pitons? Just for the hell of it, I asked. And he said, yeah, you want some? And so he mailed me up 2 or 3, but they were not the best kinds. They were verticals, ugly things really, not the famous.
No, the Lost Arrows.
I do have the one famous one that Bob Swift got, probably the Lost Arrow. A thing of beauty. I don't know what to do with it. I guess I'll give it to Golden probably, but.
Well, we can always take that would have an honored place in the museum.
Yeah. I just have it in a drawer. I look at it about once a year, so I fondle it.
Well, you were climbing extensively back in the late 50s. At what level were you climbing by modern standards? Say in the late 50s, at what level were you
My level leading was about 5'8". I was certainly not the best climber. I was maybe the fastest aid climber, absolutely. But there were a lot of people better free climbers than I. I was always scared a bit. And so I could follow 5'9", but be scared to lead 5'9". But, and then there was, of course, face climbing, which I was not very good at, but I loved cracks, even though I was not very strong. I loved thin cracks. Of course, hated the 5-inch kind that Pratt was so marvelous at. Steck and I one time went to Chingando. Remember that day?
Oh, God.
Oh. So Pratt led the thing. It was 5'10" then. And it was just this horrible start. And higher up, it got to about 6 inches wide. And Pratt led it flawlessly, of course. And then Steck walked over to the thing and couldn't get off the ground.
I couldn't get off the ground.
Couldn't get off the ground, literally. And so Pratt says, "What's going on down there?" And so I tied in. I thought, well, I got an upper belay. I can struggle up it. And I got about 2 feet. 2 feet. Pratt was up there 100 feet. And he's screaming and cursing at us because now how's he to get the iron out? He put in 2 or 3 pieces. So he had to somehow get back down.
Well, if it makes you feel any better, I had exactly the same experience climbing with Chuck, where he got into this wide sort of corner, and it was so wide, he basically chimneyed the goddamn thing.
God.
And I couldn't, I was sitting there with Tom Frost at the time. This was probably about 63, 64 maybe. 64. I was watching him do this, and I couldn't believe my eyes. And he scampered up this goddamn thing, and I couldn't get off the ground.
Oh.
And I must say that even Frost had the devil's own time getting up, following Chuck. And speaking of Chuck, I wanted to ask you if you share the opinion, my opinion, which is shared, I think, by Frost and by Royal also, that of that generation of climbers, it seems to me that Chuck was probably the best free climber that I ever came across. Of the American climbing group. Would you share that?
I think so.
Yeah.
Especially in cracks, he was a world expert, maybe along with Joe Brown and Willems, who knows. But on face climbing, he was not average, but he was good, but maybe not the best on face climbing. But in cracks, unsurpassed.
Who would you consider the best face climber?
Oh, Royal probably. Royal and Frost. Not that Pratt was a slouch, that's for sure, but he wasn't putting up 5'10" face climbs, I don't think. But he did so many superb crack climbs that his name will live forever just for that.
Yeah, he was unbelievably gifted.
Oh yeah, and a very good writer.
Yes, as a matter of fact, that was a great disappointment. To me personally, because when I first saw some of his writing work, I was so taken by it. I said, God, can you give us more?
Yeah, he never did. Yeah,
and he
wrote 2 or 3 main articles.
Yeah.
And then a couple of little notes in the back of the journals.
But he was coulda, woulda, shoulda. He could have been a pretty famous,
Well, his famous quote was I don't want to, what was it, that I do.
Well, I was
Don't
trying
get
to put
exactly.
together in my mind, just as if you were getting there now. I don't want to photograph it, I don't want to talk about it, I don't want to write about it, I just want to do it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Great.
And he lived up to that credo.
He wouldn't write after a while. But he did, we had a marvelous climb together.
Ribbon Fall.
Ribbon Falls,
Yeah.
East Portal. And he wrote a good account of it.
A very, very funny account.
Where was that published?
On the back of the AAJ.
In the back of the AA.
Yeah. But he talked about Evans said Evans tried to destroy us by dropping a pack on us.
Yeah.
That kind of stuff. It was very humorous.
Yeah. I'm sure you're familiar with the other great quote from Chuck Pratt, which was, if I recall it correctly, something that ran something like, "I can remember when sex was safe and climbing was dangerous."
Oh, right. I think that was somebody else invented that, but Pratt talked about it like that. Also, Pratt, one time we were out somewhere the base of El Cap, I think, and a rattler was there. So I picked up a stone to go kill it, and Pratt says, "Don't do that, don't do that." And he says, I said, "Why not, man?" He said, "It's right here at the base of the rope up spot." And he said, "And have every rattlesnake in the valley looking for me?" That was good.
One of our last big leads on the Ribbon Portal climb, maybe Evans was belaying, and I was just bored out of my skull. I was hammering the date into the wall. There was a crack there, and Pratt was beside me. You know, for something else, something to do, you know. And Long was way up ahead leading the guillotine pitch. And Pratt suddenly screams out into the void, "I could live for 1,000,000 years and never understand why I'm here. Why am I mean, this is really screaming. Why am I here?"
Yeah, I said, "I could have been dating secretaries down below, and I could be doing this and that. Why? Yeah, I heard all about that.
Did you?
Yeah.
Sure you did.
When did you begin to think about doing the history of Camp 4?
Well, when I was in the Army in Vietnam during most of 1965, so Steck and I were writing letters back and forth, and I wrote him and said, "Let's do a history." I said, "You take the old guys, I'll take the new guys, and we'll write the history." And that was 1965. And as I said in the book that finally came out 20 years later, I said something on the order of, "What if we had done it back then?" When, you know, then I listed a whole bunch of stuff, and, you know, Sackler and Pratt hadn't done their incredible series of free climbing. El Cap had only about 3 routes on El Cap in 1965. What if we'd done the book then? It would be a terrible book. It would have been a start, of course, but so 20 more years when I finally wrote the thing by myself, like climbing had changed irrevocably, just become popular, completely new equipment. People were having pull-up bars in Camp 4, stuff like that. And nobody was drinking wine anymore; they were just smoking grass. So everything had changed in 20 years. So I'm glad we waited, actually. You didn't display, you're a working man, of course. You didn't display too much interest.
Well,
Yeah, right then.
Yeah, well, I told Seattle Mountaineers Books to get at you to do that.
Right.
And finally
Right.
they did. They nailed you for the contract.
I must tell you that I was very flattered when I first got a look at your book, Camp 4, that you had so many quotes from me.
Oh, I've forgotten, yeah.
I was wondering how you got onto that stuff.
Made them up, probably, yeah.
No. All your quotes were accurate. I assure you.
Okay. Otherwise, I would have heard from you, I'm sure.
You probably would have. Let me ask you now I'm jumping ahead decades, but you of course remember the big dust-up when the National Park Service decided they were going to close Camp 4. And Tom stepped up to the plate on that one.
Yep.
And he hired Dick Duane.
Right.
Are you aware of the significance of the book Camp 4 in our eventual victory?
No, I guess not.
Well, I'm going to tell you.
Yeah,
Duane was a very, very good legal tactician. He was an experienced trial lawyer. And of course, he was originally hired by Tom, and he really got the bit in his teeth, and he and I basically met at the beginning of all the trouble. I came out on behalf of the American Alpine Club, and I met with the Albright and all the rest of those guys, and they looked over their plans, and I came to the conclusion that we were not going to be able to talk them out of it. So I came back to Allison Osius was the president of the American Alpine Club at the time, and I recommended the American Alpine Club join the lawsuit. which was a big step for the American Alpine
Yeah,
Club to actually do that, especially since there was a long history with the Albright family. And, you know, Grand Teton Climbers Ranch, for example, was the Albright the elder generated that thanks to Nick Clinch. But that's a point aside. Duane actually had the idea to begin a camp.
Very flattering, if that's true. The
And
most important man ever
and
to
the
read
next
my
thing
book.
we
Yeah,
knew,
right.
I mean, we also generated a campaign with the UIAA because we had good contacts with the leadership of the UIA. And they were all of a sudden getting letters from Germany and France.
It's all you guys.
The book Camp 4, and I must thank you for that, has a very significant part of American climbing history.
Yeah, I'd love to hear you talk about the book a little bit.
Well, as I say, I had it in the back of my mind doing the history for 20 years, or maybe 25 years. And because I figured that I knew the place as well as anybody as far as the history. You know, I had a huge collection of Sierra Club bulletins, AAJs going back to 1955. And I've always been a good researcher. I know how to do that kind of stuff. Somehow, God knows how. And the story of how it actually came to be is, as Steck implied, or not really implied, there was a guy named Gary Arce, A-R-C-E, and he sent a proposal to do a book to the Mountaineers in Seattle, and Donna DeShaza was the head of that, contacted Steck and said, "Do you know this guy, or what should he do it?" And Steck wrote back and said, "Roper should be the one to do it." And so Donna DeShazo emailed me or wrote me, whatever it was in those days, and said, "Would you like to read the manuscript of this guy?" And so I read it, and I said, I didn't want to be arrogant, but I said I can do a better job. And he was not there, so it's nothing personal about his book. He had a lot of stuff in there, but wasn't terribly well written, and was not personal. And so I wrote back and I gave her my opinion, and she said, "Why don't you do it? If you're such a smarty pants, like, you go ahead and do it." And so within a week I sent a proposal, and she said, "Go for it." And I got an amazing $9,000 advance.
Ooh, wow.
It's unbelievable. Any other book I've done, I've gotten maybe 1,000 or something. Somehow I asked for 15, I'm sure, but she said 9,000. I said, "Oh, yeah, okay, I'll take it." Correct. Had to pay income tax for the first time in my life.
Yeah, go ahead, please.
How would you describe Camp 4 to someone who's never been to Yosemite?
Well, to describe the physical site of Camp 4, on a slope, very, very close to Yosemite Lodge, which made life very easy for us for the bar and the cafeteria. And it was a couple of acres of sloping ground, right, exactly at 4,000 feet. 4,000 elevation goes right through the middle of it, and tilted, and the lower part was flatter, and that's where the tourists would stay, people in their trailers and stuff, because then the roads got pretty rough in the upper part. There were roads you sort of drive virtually anywhere you wanted in the old days. And so to camp there were some tables scattered around, but you could just put your tent anywhere. This was back in the 50s and 60s. And there were only 10 or 15 climbers usually in the springtime. And the best part of Camp 4 is the boulders, including the world-famous Columbia boulder, which is the size of Steck's house, just about, and has a very famous boulder problem called Midnight Lightning. And so there were boulders to practice on, and places to more or less hide if the rangers were having one of their fits about overstaying our limits, 14-day limits. You could go up behind Camp 4, and the enormous Talus field behind Camp 4, and there were sort of caves, Talus caves. And so if the rangers were after us, we'd just go up there and spend 3 or 4 days, and then sort of slink back down into the lower campground. But as I say, there are no tourists in the upper part, or very few. And in the weekdays, back in the 50s and 60s, deserted in the upper part. Friday night, people would come in, and I almost got run over a few times by people just driving up, probably drunk at midnight from the city, and almost running me over. And 2 kinds of trees, the incense cedars and the ponderosa pines, huge things, maybe 2 or 3 feet in diameter. But one bad thing about it was it got a little bit dusty as the summer wore on. And then, of course, in the winter it would snow or rain, and that wasn't good. But we all had tents of a sort, very rudimentary tents. I had a Sears Hillary tent for a couple of years there, not a mountain tent at all. But most people had tents, and we'd steal mattresses from the Curry Company and put them inside our big tents and try to entice women up there. Very little luck with that. It was quite a place, and then lots of music. Some people had tape decks and things. Classical music, basically. Hard to believe. That wouldn't happen now. Classical music.
Were you there when the Rangers made it? You could only stay in Camp 4 if you had a pet.
Oh, yeah.
You
Yeah.
remember those days?
Yeah. There was a big sign that said pets only. Like that. So, what about people? Oh my God. Yeah, it was some crazy thing that somebody thought up, some ranger thought up.
Pretty weird,
Yeah.
So how would you describe the significance of Camp 4 to the history of climbing to an outsider?
Well, the hardest climbs in the world were in Yosemite, and Camp 4 was the only place where people stayed. So it had huge historical significance as early as the 30s. The hardest climbs in America, probably. Maybe the Schwangungs had a few too, but so the hardest climbs in America in the 40s, Lost Arrow, Chimney, Steck's Great Route on Sentinel. So it was famous even then. And then about 1966 is when the first foreigners came. 2 Frenchmen came and climbed the nose in the spring of '66. And of course then they wrote about it in magazines back in Europe. And then when the British came over in late '66 or '67, guys like Whillans, Dougal Haston came there, and the word just spread exponentially, of course. And Camp 4 was always at the center because that's where people stayed. It's the only place. So it just spread. And then by the '70s, Japanese were coming over, and it actually became too much for me. I hated it. Just couldn't find a place to camp. You'd be camping 5 feet away from somebody else, no privacy. It's even worse now. I was up there about a year ago, and tents are just, my God, they're 2 feet apart. 100 of them. Very expensive tents too. Just everybody must be rich now compared to what we had. So yeah, Camp 4 was the focus of American Western climbing. You had the Schwangungs and the Tetons later, but the focus of California obviously was, everybody had to go to Yosemite. Simple as that. It's a small place, of course. The valley is only 7 square miles or less. And there are other campgrounds, but they don't have boulders, and they're spread out. Camp 4 was sort of in the center. You could walk to El Cap in half an hour, and go to the Yosemite Falls area in 10 minutes. So it was centrally located compared to the other campgrounds. Had the boulders. Was right at the base of the was called the Camp 4 wall, right behind Camp 4. The huge talus field. The other campgrounds were just in forest, just very plain forest campgrounds, so of little interest to us.
And then there was bandit camping.
Oh yeah, people.
You find your little niche
Yeah,
somewhere, and you just go there,
Yeah, people had little favorite places down by Ribbon Fall. There used to be a road that went in, not the manure pile buttress road, that went to the manure pile from the stables. But down further, there was a road that went into some sort of lumber area, and it had a gate, but you could get around the gate. So you come up on a Friday night and say, let's just camp here for the night, instead of going to Crowded Camp 4. So yeah, lots of illegal camping, that's for sure. I didn't do too much of that, but
Could you tell us, you mentioned that the Brits were not the first Europeans to appear in the valley.
well, there are
But
two.
the Brits must have been very close to the beginning of the European visitors.
I think the two Frenchmen who came in April of '66 were the first foreigners, and hadn't been very many, if you want to call Colorado a foreign place. Why, Leighton Core came in for the first time in October of 1960. I unfortunately was the only one left in Camp 4 about then, and so he just grabbed me, as only he could, as you well know, a very forceful fellow. And so we did a couple of very good routes. The North Buttress of Lower Cathedral, the third ascent of that. Several very hard climbs in October. So he was the first really good climber to come from outside California, 1960. And then the New Yorkers came in about 1966, I think.
Probably before that, Steve.
Maybe, okay. Oh yeah, of course.
Yeah.
Because I climbed, Art Grant and I did a first ascent on North Dome in about 1962, yeah. So the Bulgarians came out about 1962.
Yeah.
I don't know if you were with them.
No,
You were a working man too, of course. Yeah.
I was a working person at that time, yes.
Kelsey was a Bulgarian, wasn't he?
Who, Kelsey?
Joe?
Yeah,
Yes.
he's probably half,
Yes, Joe was
he came a little
he
late.
was the poet laureate of the Bulgarians.
Yeah.
Bulgarians, right. Yeah.
You mentioned very briefly that you were a very fast nailer. Were you a faster nailer than Leighton?
I guess we were about, nobody could be as fast as him. Maybe I was second fastest in the Yosemite. Yeah, both of them. When we climbed together, my God, we went crazy just climbing unbelievably fast.
Yeah.
And we did the third ascent of the nose of El Cap with Glenn Denny, who was quite the opposite, a very meticulous nailer. So Leighton and I would look at each other sometimes and say, God, why doesn't he get going there? He was very safe and made good anchors. That's the important thing. But Leighton and I were maybe twice as fast as he was. Yeah. Leighton was so fast that he would climb over you if you were belaying in slings. He would and had led a pitch and belaying in slings. He's coming up very fast and just climbs over you, just using every part of your body as a foothold. And the head, my glasses would be coming off. God, just was unbelievable. So what I started doing when I led a pitch, I'd go up another 10 feet, put a couple of pins in, and put the rope through that. So he'd come up and he would just trash me going by, but at least he didn't linger there. And I could hand him up the iron and stuff.
Getting back to pitons, in your recollection, and I'm sure you have a very intense recollection of this particular kind of history, who was the first person that started doing chrome molybdenum knife blades?
Well, it was not in the Tetons, it was down at Tahkeets, Southern California. Chuck Wilkes,
Yep.
he wrote an article called The Knife Blade Piton in the Sierra Club Bulletin about 1949 or 50 maybe.
Mm-hmm.
So, and he had little sketches of it. He was an engineer of some sort, yeah. So he had the nice little sketches with all little, 16th of an inch here and an 1/8 of an inch over here.
Mm-hmm.
So that was about 1950.
He was a professor at Caltech.
Right. And then, yeah, he was a metallurgist, I think.
Yeah.
So yeah, I don't know about the Tetons. I don't think any of the early Teton guys made their own gear, unlike Chenard, Wilkes, Jerry Galvis made pitons.
Yep.
Dolt, Bill Fuhrer, and Dolt
Yep.
made pitons, but I don't remember anybody. There was a guy in the Gunks, you'd know the name immediately, with that weird angle piton, that weird shape.
Yeah.
Norton Smith or something?
Norton Smith.
Norton Smith, okay. Haven't thought of that for a while. But I don't think anybody was making horizontals or anything back then.
Not in the Schwangos.
No.
there's a kind of a long history of confrontation with the rangers and the climbing community in general. When did that begin? It's actually a long history of confrontations. Yeah. But why don't you tell us a little bit about, some of that history to your recollection?
Well, the ranger-climber relations were never good because we were having too much fun, I think. And we're scruffy-looking people. And when they saw us, they would never see us while we were climbing, naturally. And they'd only see us when we're in Camp 4, maybe drinking or having parties that lasted till 11 or 12 at night, pissing off the tourists, of course. So I remember as early as 58 that rangers would come and break up parties, and we would agree to breaking up the party, and then the ranger would drive away. And the party, of course, would continue just to show them. But then after 15 minutes, we'd go stagger off to bed. So there was that, the noise, and then the scruffiness. No showers. We stole showers from the lodge, and nearby the lodge. We'd go in there like at 10 at night sometimes, and nobody would be around. And we'd have the employees would give us keys occasionally, or else the doors would be open. Or you'd wait till somebody comes out, and you'd go dart right in. And so we were not exactly the cleanest people. We showered, once or twice a week. But smelly, scruffy, and clothes that had holes in the knees. And so then, so the rangers, as I say, would see us in Camp 4 at parties, but also in the lodge. Not really disturbing people, but tourists would be looking at us a little oddly.
Well, we had to sign out to go for a climb.
Oh yeah,
at the chief ranger's office.
Oh yeah.
So, we're walking in with all our gear on.
Yeah, clankety clank.
Don't know why, but
yeah.
maybe it's because we weren't parked there, so we were getting ready to go to climb somewhere.
Yeah.
We'd have it all around us, clanking hard.
Yeah.
That used to just
Oh yeah.
drive them wild,
There is a certain history of petty larceny.
Oh yes.
Why don't you tell us, what your recollection is of?
Yeah. Well, we were very poor, and we prided ourselves on living on $1 a day. But of course, that was supplemented by stealing and shoplifting from the store. And then one horrible incident that the famous Frank Sacker and I endured was he wanted to learn how to shoplift food. So I was a past master at this. It was, we're talking about $5 worth of meat or something. And so I went in there, and with Frank, I said, I'd be glad to show you, a couple tricks here. So I said, well, you put the steak in the bottom of there was no plastic bags in those days, it was paper bags. So you put the steak in the very bottom and then throw in about 4 pounds of potatoes. And then the guy would go weigh it, and you'd get the steak for about 20 cents or something instead of $3. So I did this. I said, okay, watch this now. And so I filled up the bag with potatoes, went up there very confidently to the cashier, and unbeknown to me, they had installed new scales. Instead of the scales down sort of at counter level, instead of being up higher, they were down at counter level. And so he puts them down fairly low and sees a little corner of the steak peering out or something. And he looked at us and scowled at us and picked it out and said, that's $3.29, and he rings that up on the thing. He says, don't ever come in this store again. And so we waited about 3 days before coming to the store at different hours or something when he wouldn't be there, this one cashier. So Sacker just went beet red. Unbelievable. I probably did too. But then another embarrassing incident of my youth, my misspent youth. I was 1 month before my 21st birthday, and I'd inherited $2,100 from my grandfather, a fortune. And so I was treating everybody at the bar. But I was only 20, and this big guy, I don't know if you remember the guy, a huge guy named Adrian, he was the chief bartender, and he said, are you 20? Are you 21? And I said, yes, sir, I am. And luckily he didn't ask for my ID, but he said, I'm going to trust you when you say you're 21. You better be 21. I said, yes, sir, I am. So I still feel bad about that, but I was only a month away, for Christ's sake, so why couldn't he have made an exception? So I spent most of the $2,100 in the bar buying booze. I wanted to try everything: Rusty Nails, Brandy Alexander's, daiquiris. And I'd buy rounds for 6 people at the table. So my $2,100 lasted about 3 or 4 months. Meanwhile, I'd started work. But this lad here, the Steck, it's easy to remember the date, January 1st, 1960, the start of the new decade. I'd gone to Steck and said, I need a job. I just quit Oakland City College, and I thought I'd better work. And so Steck hired me as the rental boy, ski rental boy. And so for all of January, February, March, and April, I handed out skis every Friday afternoon. So it was a full-time job. And so that went on for about 3 or 4 years. And I got stuck back into climbing a bit, along with other people. By the ski, I didn't open until 10. And so at 8 o'clock, we'd get up, and remember the cold days at Cragmont Rock
Oh, yes.
and Indian Rock, we'd set up a rope and climb between 8 and 9 o'clock, then go to work. So this arrangement of working in the winter lasted until I went in the Army, which was 4 days after JFK was shot. I was down at Fort Ord, basic training. Then went to Georgia and Vietnam, came back from Vietnam in late '65, and Steck and I had been corresponding, as I mentioned. And so he hired me again. And in this story, maybe I shouldn't tell this story, but what the hell, Bridwell was the ski repairman at the ski hut when I got out of the Army. And Bridwell was caught with about 3 pair of unmounted skis at midnight on University Avenue in Berkeley, walking along with 6 skis, all naked skis. And a cop stopped him and said, "What the hell, what are you doing?" And arrested him, or cited him, or I guess arrested him.
I think he was
Arrested,
arrested.
and his old man was an airline pilot who came to see George Rudolph, the owner of the hut, and something happened where Bridwell got off. But when the cop says, what are you doing with these skis? And Bridwell stupidly said, "I'm going skiing." And these were unmounted skis at midnight at University Avenue. He apparently had hidden them. He had
In the backyard.
and there's a backyard with an easy fence to get over. So he'd hidden them when he was working that day. He'd hidden them in the back. So he was going to sell them to people and make some money. So I'm not sure we want this to be known. I guess Bridwell won't last long, probably. So
Well,
yeah. So anyway, I was hired within weeks of getting out of the Army as the ski repairman. Steck knew what to do. He'd been a ski repairman for 15 years, which is basically mounting skis, basically. And so I held that for about 5 years. Every November 1st, I'd show up at the hut, and every April 1st, I would leave, clutching my meager pay. The bastard didn't pay me much at all, but I'd have maybe $1,000 saved up. And so that's how I lived, basically, for about 10 years, all the 60s, and all the 60s, thanks to this man here.
Could you go back to the issue of petty larceny and tell us what you recollect about the part that the Brit climbers, when they first came into Yosemite, played in, say, stealing food and one thing and another from the curry company?
Well, I was gone for those 2 years in the Army, and then after that I sort of slowed down. So I don't know much about the valley after, say, 69 or so. So I never met the Brits there except for Mick Burke, the wonderful Mick Burke.
Oh yeah.
He was a wonderful fellow in Camp 4. We bouldered a lot together, but I don't remember him. I'm sure they did petty larceny, of course, but I was either not aware of it or just didn't care. By this time, I wasn't doing that myself, so I sort of learned my lesson with that Sacker incident. Yeah. But I don't remember I know the Brits had a reputation petty larceny.
Did you ever have much interaction with Dougal Haston?
No, never met the guy, I think. No,
Okay.
no. I think he only made one visit, maybe. Climbed the south face of Watkins, I recall. Never met Willems either. I think these guys came when I was in the Army, I'm pretty sure. And they didn't do much of repeat visits. They were fairly poor guys.
When did you first meet Al?
Well, as I mentioned earlier, 1954, my old man took me to Indian Rock with Hervey Vosges. And I won't say it was the exact date. It was in the spring of '54. Steck would come out along with Dave Brower, a famous guy, and Hervey Vosges, of course.
And Dick Leonard.
Dick Leonard, and these are all Sierra Club sponsored outings.
Sierra Club rock climbing section.
Rock climbing section. So every Sunday, or virtually every Sunday at 1 o'clock, we'd meet at one of the 3 Berkeley rocks, or a wonderful place called Hunter's Hill up by Vallejo that you and I climbed at maybe 25 times.
Right.
A big old cliff about 150 feet high, and it's 80 degrees, rotten rock and all that. There was a place in San Francisco called Miraloma Rocks, not a very nice place. Mickey's Beach out by Stinson Beach. And a place called Pine Canyon out by Mount Diablo. So every Sunday there would be a climb, or every other Sunday probably. And Steck was a leader occasionally. He'd show up for half an hour or so. And then he had other things to do. He was raising a family at that very moment. We're talking 55 now maybe. That's when Sarah was born. Sarah's 60 years old. One of his kids is 60. Gee, God almighty. I remember her when she was, we can get to talking about Ascent later, but she was running around the house, as an 8-year-old or whatever. She would have been 10 years old when we invented Ascent in this very room. 1954 I met Steck. Didn't see too much of him until 1960. And then, as I say, he hired me, so for 10 full years, I worked winters there except for the Army.
Tell us about of how you came to conceive of Ascent.
Well, that's a hard one. Steck and I argue slightly over the way the Sierra Club handled it. And Steck knows it. I think Siri and Brower, what I do know is right here in this very room that we're in, one day in late 66, I'd say November of 66, Steck and Joe Fitchin and I had been talking about a new magazine, because the Sierra Club Bulletin, which is the record, the historical record for 75, 60 years, whatever, was now going to be a conservation magazine, not a climbing. Sierra Club had gone totally topsy-turvy, as they should have, of course, from about 1950, when they were a hiking, climbing organization. It's only 7,000 members, mostly California. And 10 years later, after Brower got a hold of the organization, 70,000 in a conservation organization who didn't care much about climbing anymore. There was no need to. And so we looked at it with horror about the end of the annual Sierra Club Bulletin, which stopped in 1963. And we said, we got to have a repository for our first descents.
You and I and Kelsey were here?
No, Fitchin.
Fitchin, okay.
Yeah. And during that fall, you and I and Fitchin was going to grad school here or something. And we just casually talked with a lot of booze and dinners and stuff. We talked about a thing, and someone, probably Steck, said, let's talk to the Sierra Club about this. And Dave Brower lived only about a mile from here, 2 miles. And somebody had the good idea, probably Steck again, a good idea of bringing Brower here to look at slides.
Well, back up.
Of the
I went to a
Hummingbird
meeting
Ridge.
in San Francisco
Oh, before the
of the Sierra Club Publications Committee.
slideshow.
Yeah.
Okay, well,
Oh,
I don't know some of this stuff.
You don't remember that? Huh? Well,
no.
anyway,
I wasn't there. so
yeah,
I
I went to
remember
the Publications Committee meeting. Well,
Okay.
Siri
August
was
Frugier,
president, wasn't he?
probably, yeah. August Frugier, head of
And
the,
August Frugier was Publications
yeah.
chairman. And so I presented a case for a new publication called Ascent. And a lot of discussion happened, you know, and Brower was opposed to it at first. Well, I mean, during that whole meeting.
well,
And
yeah.
well, let me just finish
Yeah,
that
yes,
meeting.
yes.
And Frugier, and with the help of Frugier and Siri, they approved it. And then
Brower was worried that his turf was being
Brower
fucked
was
over,
probably
yeah.
afraid that he was losing
Yeah,
control of
mountaineering part, yeah.
the mountaineering part of the Sierra Club, which he was, of course, but it had to happen. So anyway, that's what happened there, and it was approved, and we went on from there. And Brower came to our first meeting here,
Yeah, right here,
and
yeah.
we hadn't decided on a cover. We wanted, and he gave us a color cover of the book, didn't he? Of
Well,
the magazine.
there I remember this very well because there were only about 8 of us in the room, and Steck was showing all of his Hummingbird Ridge climb slides. So this screen is right over here, and we're all standing here looking and oohing and ahhing at the pictures. And Brower all of a sudden just doesn't yell, but loudly he says, "That's the cover. That'll be the cover. We'll do it full cover."
And we just
So,
were
just-
struck dumb, you know.
We're speechless, fucking
It was
speechless.
just, what more could we want?
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's how we got the cover on the first issue of the set.
But he insisted, he didn't have much to do with the design or anything, but he insisted the first cover be a non-bled cover.
Yeah.
So it had these huge, stupid,
He had this weird.
inch and a half white
fascination
margins,
with
as I
white
have here.
margins
Yeah.
in photographs. We would argue about this every time we met. It seemed like, you know, how can you do this? Because a fully bled picture is much more imposing.
It's bigger and more beautiful. And then he also insisted on the typeface, which was called Aragai or something weird, and Centaur. There were 2 typefaces that he loved more than in every one of his exhibit format books.
Is that how it happened that we got that?
Yeah,
typeface?
yeah, he insisted on that.
About that, yeah.
And we kept that for 4 or 5 years. It was a very nice typeface, both the italics and the main, and the heads.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I'll never forget that, him exclaiming, "That's the cover." And it it was one of the better pictures. You and I might have chosen a different one, I don't know. There was ones that have more cornices or something.
Hard to
Anyway,
say.
beautiful cover. And so we worked on it that winter, and I see, just looking at it yesterday, before I came here, I looked at the first issue to see, my wife was saying, tell the boys there that who was associated with that first issue. So naturally I looked at the masthead, and it was just you and me and Fitchin. I'm sure we had a lot of help from Pratt, Glenn Denny, but they're not listed on the masthead. Maybe they didn't have too much to do with it. I think you put together the main first issue, I think, the main stuff in there.
Yeah.
And Steck, of course, got the lead article for himself, naturally.
Yeah, sure.
That was a brilliant article, so why not? And then on the back,
Hummingbird Ridge.
yeah, an Ascent of Hummingbird Ridge. And the inside back cover, there's the head that says, "Oh no, not another mountaineering journal." Stretched all the way across the top of the thing. And so Steck wrote this thing. He starts out by saying, "That's what Tom Hornbein of Everest fame said when he heard this, but he gave us the $2 because we had somehow sent out. How do we send out? Maybe in the New Sierra Club Bulletin, maybe there was a postcard kind of thing,
I think there was, yeah.
and it said send in $2 or pledge $2, and we'll see if this. The Sierra Club said we'll see what this will come to. We'll try one issue here and see what how it works. So Hornbein had sent in his $2, and I think we got 700 people to send in $2 each. And so in July of '67, I have a picture of me taken on my mother's porch holding the day it came in the mail, or we probably went down to, we had a local printer here, a fabulous printer, Pacific Rotoprinting. And this was a guy in Oakland, or Emeryville, or Oakland, I guess, and run by a guy named Harold Ireland, who had invented some sort of rotoprinting technique. So we went down there, and for the last couple of months of before it came out, the last couple of months before it came out, we went down and talked to them about color balances.
Well, they did the layout too for us, remember?
That first one, I don't remember that, yeah, we later did it, yeah. So we would go down there, and then in the very, very end, the last couple of weeks, watch the presses roll. And arrogantly, occasionally said, a little too much.
We would write the press, actually.
Yeah, we'd be right there with the man. And say, put a little more magenta maybe in there, as if we knew what we were talking about.
That's great.
Oh, those were great days.
So for about, I'd say the first 4 issues we did down here in Oakland or Emeryville
To go to printing people. Right.
with those guys, and got to know them pretty well. And then they had these giant sheets, 4 by 4 of proof sheets, and I still have some of those things, and you probably have one, someone kicking around.
The big sheets, maybe so.
Yeah. And so that was, and then the Sierra Club did not want to do, Brower played with that first issue probably a bit, typeface and stuff, but he never opened his mouth again. By 1969, of course, he was gone from the Sierra Club. He was fired in '69, so he wouldn't have had anything to do with it. But so the club just gave us a blank check, almost literally. They paid Pacific Rotoprinting for the press run.
Yeah.
Gave total control to us, which is rather amazing because we knew nothing about that kind of thing. We knew the written word. That was always fun. Stuff would come in the mail because Steck would always put the address, which was the place where he was now working, Mountain Travel, which he started in 1969, I think, or earlier maybe, but yeah, 69, yeah. And so that was at the back of the magazine, which was a magazine, later became much more of like a book. In the back of it, it said send material to McDowell Place in Oakland. Right, very close to where I live, 3 minutes from where I now live. And so people would send us stuff, of course, and the quality was just incredibly different. Some brilliant stuff of Dave Roberts, maybe a little bit later, but some utterly brilliant stuff and some utter trash, which we very politely, one of us would get it, Fitchin or Steck or me would get the thing and say, why don't you handle this guy? No, why don't you handle him? And
You tell him.
yeah. And so, well, you had some good ideas in there, my lad, but somehow it's not quite what we want. And keep trying, good luck, and bye-bye.
Then along came Drummond.
Then Ed Drummond, the great British climber and author, that was a little bit later, probably 4 or 5 or 6 years later. Well, yeah, hard to know. Brilliant, a controversial writer, one of our editors. By this time, the Sierra Club wanted the thing edited. In the first 4 or 5 issues, we were very pleased to be very good scholars and everything. And there are a few typos, there are very few. I was a fanatic, a very pedantic guy, and I would check everything very carefully, read it over 3 or 4 times, get rid of every possible typo. Or Sierra Club decided to have editors go over our finished product.
When was
Yes.
Drummond's big piece?
Oh yeah, and what's her name? John Hart's girlfriend at the time, working as an editor of the club, Marianne Stewart. Looked it over and said, "This thing is a piece of shit here. This Ed Drummond piece."
He's got 2 two metaphors in the same sentence.
Two mixed metaphors
Two mixed
in
metaphors.
the same sentence.
He said, "Leave it. That's our boy Ed." You
Yeah,
know,
yeah.
and they did. They left
Yeah.
it. Well, this is when the thing became a book.
Yeah.
We're talking about
Yeah.
19.
First issue was 48 pages, and maybe the next was 52.
1980 was the first book, wasn't it?
Yeah, I think so. And that was a real book of maybe 125 pages or something,
Yeah.
with hardcovers, eventually hardcovers. So it had this enormous,
Well, 80
history.
was softcover.
okay, Ed Webster photograph probably. It went from a 48-page magazine selling for $2 to, after 13 issues, the last one about what, 2000?
2000.
Was it? Okay. So how many years is that? 33 years? Yeah, 33 years, 13 issues only. Because we got lazy. And Climbing, the magazine called Climbing, started in 1970. And that was a piece of shit for years. Then it got better. Mountain was so impressed with Ascent, apparently, that they started getting better. Really glossy, beautiful stuff, Mountain. And so we started to, people went other places to get their stuff published on a more routine basis. So by the mid-70s, we were doing, it sort of happened that, well, let's don't do one this year, let's do a double issue, which we did, and then let's do a 3-year gap here, and then let's do a 4-year gap. So it was very unprofessional in a way, but too much competition, and we didn't have money to pay people.
You can't produce a book every year. If you're doing a book, then you just have to do every 4 years, let's say.
Okay, yeah.
I mean, a book is
Well, a big undertaking. So in the last issue, 2000 you claim? Yeah, I think so. Right around
yeah.
there. So Ed Webster took it over. We gave him the material. He took over the design, and for the first time the AAC was the publisher. And everybody was so poor that we had to get donations for the first time ever. So Chenard and the weird guy David Swanson and somebody else.
David's still around, by the way.
Is he? I thought he's still in prison, or?
No, he got sprung.
Okay.
He's living back east in upstate New York.
Uh-huh.
He was in touch with me recently.
Huh. Anyway, so they gave money, Chenard and Swanson, somebody else gave money, which was a little bit embarrassing. I mean, and then Webster, we were not terribly pleased with his design, very cluttered design.
Well, he took over the whole project and just didn't tell us what he was doing. And
Well, we gave him all the material, but we gave him...
He added stuff of his own.
Yeah.
And instead of, we had David Harris working with us that time. And
from
he
Canada.
said, okay, David, you're the poetry editor, and you just take care of that aspect of it. And what's our poets?
John Hart.
John Hart had written a bunch of poetry, and we sent it all to Harris, and he gave it all
Yeah, he put
to, instead of editing it and taking only maybe 2 poems, he gave
he took 8 or something.
he took 8 poems and gave it to Webster, who printed all of them.
So we did not like that thing, vowed never to do it again. It was totally out of our control. When the first one was totally in our control, on like 98% in our control, the last one,
And
2% in control.
English guy's name, Ed Douglas.
Ed Douglas, yeah.
He wrote a scathing review of the last issue of Ascent.
Uh-huh. I never
Just
saw that.
unbelievably, just the worst publication in the world, he said.
Jesus.
And our names were still attached to it. Oh.
Yeah. So
We could have committed Harry Carey, but we didn't.
That was a glorified end of Ascent.
Never again.